So, hi everybody. My name is Sarah Jackson. I am trying to figure out how to turn down the brightness on my lamp before it blinds me. That's not it. There you go. Whew. Did not handle staring at that for an hour, 2 hours. So again, hi everyone. I'm Sarah Jackson. I am your instructor facilitator for this course. This is SA106, Recognizing and Serving Exceptional Learners. And I am the Twice Exceptional Instructional Specialist for Montgomery County Public Schools. This is my second time teaching this class on Zoom, and tonight will be probably a little more unusual for me because I am not doing too well with my throat, so I'm going to teach until my voice goes out. I could be here 2 hours, I could be here 45 minutes. We'll see how it goes. If my voice gives out, I'm going to post a recording from last session for you to watch what I was going to talk about. And we'll just have to make do with it from there because I don't know how long my throat's going to last tonight, but we're going to give it our best shot. I have put the attendance form in the chat. The attendance form is also on the home page of our course. And so I'm going to do some housekeeping things just to start us off so that everybody's kind of on the same page. If you have questions along the way, stop me if I talk too fast, which I usually do. Please stop me and let me know. And other than that, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to take us to our course page first, just to give you guys an opportunity if you haven't done so already. Hopefully you see the Recognizing and Serving course page. It's moving. I'm very proud of my moving GIF, by the way. So this is our summer page. I have restructured it. I know there's a few people who started with me last semester and had to move to summer. So I've restructured it and hopefully it's more streamlined and makes more sense. If it doesn't, tell me and I'll change it again for next semester. But I've pretty much broken everything down into 7 modules, and each session will be 1 module. You do not have to watch anything or do anything in the module prior to coming to class, because as I learned last session, it doesn't open till the day of our first class. So I can't ask you to do anything ahead of time since you guys have had access to it for like 8 hours, 10 hours, something like that. I think I've tested all the links, but if their links are not working, please do let me know and I will get those fixed as quickly as possible. And then really what I ask is that you keep a pace that works for you. I have until about a week after our course ends to get all my grades in. And so if you are, if you need a little bit of extra time, you have about a week after that, so that I can then submit grades, because I can't bring people in, or I can't submit people's grades until everybody has done all the work. I also learned that last semester. And so for people who are trying to get this done to meet the credit deadlines, I would like to get this in before August if I can, but if you need the extra time, do let me know. So each of our modules should be working, fingers crossed. The Zoom button here should take you directly to our course, but if not, you have your course ID. Oh, it moves. I didn't know it moved. You have the course ID and the passcode on here, and then also the attendance form. So like I said, if you do miss class and you go to watch one of the makeup videos, just make sure you record your attendance so that I can put in that you went back and made up the course. The last thing on here is my contact information. I also have this great booking link, which I'm 99% sure it works because somebody did test it. If you have questions or if part of your project ends up being talk time with me, use the booking link to set up a time. It will automatically put something on my calendar. It will show you when I'm available. I gave you guys really, I think you guys have time available with me between like 7 in the morning and 9 at night. Do not use this for anything other than this class, please. But if you guys need to make an appointment to talk to me, using that booking link, we'll put it on my calendar. It will block that time for you, and it will give you a link that we can jump onto so that it just becomes, I'm there and ready to go. And it also puts it on my phone, so I know that we have that meeting set up. Otherwise, generally the way my courses are currently set up is that each module, each session will have a number of topics, and each topic area ends with a discussion board. Sometimes the module is a little broader and the whole module ends in a discussion board. I do grade the discussion boards. They're graded on a 2-point system. So either you did really well, you kind of did it, or you didn't do it. It's a pretty simple, straightforward grading system. The only actual like major project I have for you guys is the case study. And this one I know gives people the most fits. I need to come up with a new name for it for sure. But if you go to the assignments in the final project, which is probably a better title for it, this is where you will submit your final project for grading. The actual assignment might not have posted itself. See, this is why I show you guys things, because now I know what's missing. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen since I have nothing to share here. Stop share. And so basically, just so everybody knows, that the case study or the final project for this course is really meant to be a summary assignment of how what you have learned applies to you in your job and position. I know I have everyone on here from general educators, special educators. Last session I had a speech language pathologist. I have had OT people, counselors, psychologists. I can't do one project that's going to work for everybody. So what I ask for you to do is to think about your job, think about what it is that you do and how we can apply this. I have a couple of like assignment ideas. So like if you're a staff development teacher, I have something on like creating a staff development plan to support teacher learning in your school around Twice Exceptional. If you're a classroom teacher, I have a plan on how you can analyze your a series of lessons to see how they meet the needs of Twice Exceptional students and what you might need to do to tweak that. For my special ed teachers, either a co-teaching plan or working on writing goals for goals and sub-aids that are appropriate for one of your students. You don't need an actual live student, but if you want a live student, you can use one of your students. I suggest the live ones. It works better that way. And the project will develop from there. The project is 10 points. Because that way, if you do the project and you don't do any of the discussion boards, you still should be able to pass the class, but I'm not very good at math, so I can't promise that. Pretty sure you have to do at least 1 or 2 discussion boards and the final project. Because it is such a condensed class, I do not expect, and I do need to cut back, I think, some of the stuff that is on there that says that you need to turn in for your final project, but I will, when I post that, I will make sure that it's clean and clear what it is that you guys are working on. But like I said, to me, it's more about being a summary. If you have an idea of what you think might work and you're not sure, shoot me an email or set up time to talk to me and we'll go over it. And if you're taking other classes right now and you feel like there's something you could do to like piggyback on what you're doing for another class, I'm a big fan of that. So please feel free to let me know what else it is you're working on right now. And I will do my best to help you make less work for yourself because I believe in more learning, less work. I'm very Twice Exceptional myself. Sorry, I also have a very rude, very elderly cat who feels the need to sometimes jump on the desk, and I apologize. So if you see a big fluffy tail go by, that's Bella. So I'm sure you will see the cat at some point. She's sitting in the window now because it's really more about the window than it is about me. So I think otherwise with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to put a Jamboard into the chat. And I would like you guys to fill this out kind of while I'm talking. In theory, this is open to anybody on the internet. God help us. So I have 3 questions in here. And one is, why did you take the class? I don't think it shows me your name. I don't really care. I am open to any responses. I literally have taken because I'm required to, because it was the easiest thing to take this summer, because I feel like I can suck up to you by taking this course. Like really anything you put out there is a perfectly legitimate answer, but I just kind of want to get a vibe of who I'm working with. This is the first time I've taught a class where I only know like 3 of the 80 people signed up. So I'm kind of excited. My next question on there is, what are your thoughts on Twice Exceptional? I understand it's day 1, but again, I want to kind of gauge where we're coming in. I know some of you have worked with Twice Exceptional kids for years, and I know some of you signed up for this class because you just wanted to take something this summer and you have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's okay too. And then the last one is just general questions. I will answer some random questions, so feel free to throw those on there. And then if you want anything else, you know, throw that up there as well. I will come back to that board. But yeah, so I want to go ahead and get us started and want to shake things up a little bit. So I'm going to start actually with an essay. And this is an essay that I wrote. And yeah, I think it'll help kind of lay the foundation for this class and for why I do what I do and why I'm here to teach you guys. So the essay is called Coming Full Circle, My Journey from 2E Student to 2E Advocate. You are so smart, Sarah, my 2nd grade teacher told me, but you can't learn because you have a problem. But the good news is there's a magic pill that can let you learn. You should talk to your parents. My problem, I had ADHD. I had ADHD in the mid-1980s when it became diagnosis du jour and everyone was taking Ritalin. Everyone was taking Ritalin. My parents knew I was special. They had me tested, but they also decided that medication wasn't right for me. My teacher was mad that my parents wouldn't give me this magic pill, and I spent most of the rest of the year sitting in the hallway or the closet because I was a behavior problem. I'm still a behavior problem, I just want to be clear. There was never any discussion about other supports or resources that might be available. No one mentioned gifted with disabilities, and certainly no one ever thought that perhaps all the problems I was causing in the classroom were due to boredom and that I had way too much time on my hands. All my behaviors were attributed to this disease that my parents wouldn't treat. In fact, by the end of 3rd grade, my teachers refused to recommend me for the gifted program because of my behavior issues. Ironically, had they recommended me for the gifted program, I may have ended up in the only GTLD program in existence in 1987, but they didn't, so here we are. Without the support of most of our local school system, we navigated the next 10, 14 years as best we could. Looking back, I can see how access to assistive technology, scribes, mindfulness strategies, and strength-based learning practices helped me keep my head above water, but just barely. Most of these supports came from my blessed and saintly mother, who at this point has been my primary support person through K-12, undergrad, and 3 master's degrees, and a career in education. And yes, sometimes the IEPs I write and finish are completed on time because of my support system and my mother. So it's now 2022 when I wrote this article, and I can reflect on all we in education have learned in the 2 decades since my K-12 experience ended. Even in the last 5 years, our understanding of giftedness, disabilities, and of course, the intersection where those exceptionalities manifest in people who live with these complex brains. But what have we done for individual students? Although we've made great gains in research, it often feels like we've made little progress on impacting the actual lives of actual twice exceptional students in public schools. We hear stories every day of students who can't get into gifted programs because of limited special ed resources, or the child who can't receive an IEP because their COG scores are too high. Or even on the occasion when the stars align and the gifted child gets an IEP, they struggle to receive services because how do I write a goal for a child who's already above grade level? I am fortunate we work in one of the 2 public school systems in the country that offer direct services for twice exceptional students as part of a continuum of services from both our special education and our accelerated and enriched programs. On the special education side, we have direct program services for students in grades 3 through 12, where students who require specially designed instruction in order to access advanced courses can receive these services through a cohort model. Beyond these services, we also offer consultative services to special and general education teachers, which involves working with school teams to build their capacity in order to serve 2E students in their home schools. We also have these same services available to teachers and special educators in our schools with advanced learning programs. So those who teach advanced learners on a daily basis learn how to program and plan for these students. On the accelerated and enriched side of the curriculum, we highlight best practices in twice exceptional and multilingual learner needs as part of our standard professional development. Interestingly, my position as the twice exceptional specialist is actually housed in the curriculum office, in the gifted office, as part of our accelerated and enriched instruction unit. Not only does it create a unique partnership between curriculum and special education, which allow us to deliver a wider range of services for 2E students, both inside and outside general education, but it sends a powerful message across our system. Our message is that our students are gifted students who face a unique set of challenges, but they are still entitled to receive challenging curriculum that plays to their strengths while we teach them strategies to mitigate or remediate areas of weakness. As most people in central office will say, I miss the kids and I miss the direct impact I had on daily lives. However, I know that through my work, I am able to make a difference in the lives of thousands of twice exceptional kids, those who are identified and those who are still struggling without understanding. I find joy in the growth I see in my central office colleagues who expanded their understanding of twice exceptional. These colleagues now stand with me as advocates for twice exceptional students. We have special education specialists coaching special education teachers on how to support advanced curriculum, and we have advanced and accelerated specialists coaching gifted classroom teachers on their role in supporting and adapting and modifying for twice exceptional students. I'm also inspired by the feedback I receive from classroom education teachers when I go out to provide consults. It's rare that I have to explain 2E as a thing. Generally, when I'm called for a consult, it's for a specific support or a nuanced case. Educators who complete these PD courses will say how important the learning is and how they can reflect on the number of 2E likely students they've had and how the learning has changed their thinking. More recently, we received a number of requests for deeper learning where educators are asking us to instruct beyond the basic course for recognizing, serving, and differentiating for 2E learners. They're asking what's next. This is a major reason I do the work I do. Even though I know I won't see the faces of most of the students who benefit from the work we are doing, I know they are finding success because of it. Because of the work, we have more people at more levels in the system talking about 2E, 3E, and other special populations in gifted ed and asking, what are we doing about this? And because of the work, we are no longer soulless in a cacophony of needs. Rather, we are a large and growing choir of voices advocating for our 2E students. But ultimately, I do the work for my 7-year-old self in 2nd grade. Or for Sarah the kindergartner who was told by the teacher she didn't belong because 4-year-olds can't possibly read. And then got sent to the closet because I picked up a book and read it to her. That was back talk. I did that a lot. Or 3rd grade Sarah, or 6th grade Sarah, or college freshman Sarah who got kicked out of the bio lab and almost got kicked out of undergrad on the 2nd day of classes. Because while I love the work I do and I love my students who grow because of that work, I still fight for the little girl who endured so much in an education system that didn't understand her. And I owe it to her to make sure her suffering was not in vain. I'm really proud. I usually cry a lot more than that. So that is my background story. I have so many other pieces that I can tell. One thing somebody once said to me was, why are you so focused on what happened to you when you were in kindergarten? And my answer was, because I am 40-something years old and it still makes me cry. And I think that that's a really important thing for us as teachers to remember, that something we say to a kid can impact them for decades. So I also learned that I now need a moment to cry. And so in doing that, I'm actually going to show you guys a quick video. It's another person telling their story, but with music and cool graphics. So I am going to share this with you. Share sound. Optimize for video clip. And I'm going to turn off my camera while I do this.
This episode is sponsored by Wondrium. Stick around till the end of the video to learn more about it. Hello, brains. Do you ever feel like you shouldn't need support for the stuff you struggle with? I I do, all the time, but that's not really how it works. A lot of people with ADHD, autism, or learning disabilities also qualify as gifted. In terms of capabilities, they fall on both ends of the bell curve. They're exceptional, outside the norm, in terms of their strengths and their impairments. They're twice exceptional. According to our How to ADHD dictionary, twice exceptional, adjective, refers to gifted students who have a coexisting disability. This is often abbreviated as 2E. Imagine someone is incredibly smart and they're also blind. They'll probably do best in classes designed for intellectually gifted students like them, and they're going to need visual aids or textbooks written in Braille. In this case, it should be fairly obvious that someone's strengths and impairments don't cancel each other out. The fact that they're blind doesn't make them any less smart, and the fact that they're smart doesn't make them any less blind. They're both, which means they need support for both. But for those of us with cognitive disabilities, it isn't always so obvious. More often than not, 2E students with cognitive disabilities end up getting less support than someone who is only gifted or who only has a disability, if they get any support at all. Why? Often their giftedness lets them perform well enough in certain areas that their disability isn't recognized or isn't taken seriously. Or their disability gets in the way enough that their giftedness isn't recognized or taken seriously. Imagine a student who's creatively gifted, but also has dyslexia. Maybe they turn in an amazing project, but get marked down because they misread the instructions. Or a physically gifted football player who doesn't perform as well as they could because they can't remember the plays. If we're looking at performance alone, both students might seem rather unexceptional, which is one reason it can be hard to identify 2E students. In both of these cases, it's easy to see an average student instead of one who is gifted in some areas and has impairments in others. Why is that a problem? Strengths and impairments don't cancel each other out. It's not that a student has ADHD, which is associated with difficulties regulating attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, but they're gifted, so it's a wash. It's that a student has ADHD, which is associated with difficulties regulating attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, and they're gifted, which can help them compensate for some of those challenges, up to a point. A gifted student with ADHD might look like they're doing fine, but under the surface, they're likely going to struggle with both being bored because the material isn't challenging enough, and with their ADHD challenges, in terms of planning, prioritizing, staying focused. Because they're struggling with both, they're going to need support for both, a class that is challenging enough for them and support for their ADHD challenges. But often, what they get is punished, discipline for things like not sitting still or being unprepared for class because they should know better, or called lazy or unmotivated for not reaching their potential. That football player who forgot to play might get benched for not taking this seriously, as if it's intentional. Because they have the potential to perform well because they're gifted, they're blamed when they don't, and in turn blame themselves. A lot of people expect one indicator of cognitive strengths, like verbal ability, to represent cognitive ability overall, when it's actually more like a mixing board. Those with ADHD and autism tend to have more spiky profiles, being stronger in one thing and weaker in another. I can relate to this. By the 3rd grade, I was scoring post-high school on reading comprehension on standardized tests, which qualifies as exceptional. I also have an exceptional amount of trouble organizing my thoughts, doing paperwork, and keeping track of deadlines. So even though I was a gifted student, I never made it to a university. I was too impaired to plan ahead and prioritize which schools to attend, hit the deadlines for applying, and sign up and study for the SATs without support. But I didn't get that support because people assumed I didn't need it because I was smart. And I never asked for accommodations because I thought I shouldn't need them, because I was smart. Or worse, that needing them would mean I wasn't actually smart. My entire sense of self-worth depending on whether or not I was smart, also common in 2E students. I struggled with everything else. Smart was all I got. I went most of my life knowing I had potential and blaming myself for not reaching it, as if being smart should have made it so I don't have ADHD. To be clear, being smart doesn't make it so that I don't have ADHD. And those who are twice exceptional have just as much a right to accommodations and support for their disabilities as anyone else. While being gifted might allow us to get by longer than we would have been able to otherwise, people perform their best when they're in an environment that addresses all of their needs, not none of them. One that supports their challenges and their strengths. And it's not just true for 2E students. The truth is, gifted or not, we all have strengths and impairments. So if we want our students, or anyone, to reach their potential, we need to give them opportunities in line with their strengths and address and accommodate their disabilities, not punish them for having one. Speaking of exceptional, Wondrium has been exceptionally
Yeah, I'm not gonna make you guys sit through a Wondrium commercial. So now that we've talked to you everything about twice exceptional, you guys should have 3 credits, right? We're good to go. So I think one of the reasons I show this and one of the reasons I tell my story is because despite what the statistics look like, being a privileged white male is not a symptom of twice exceptional. They tend to be the most identified, but that's not usually who they are. And some of the more underrepresented populations include girls, include children of color, especially Black boys, um, English language learners or EML, or emergent multilingual learners. All of our traditionally underrepresented populations are traditionally underrepresented in twice exceptional because they get their disabilities over-identified and their giftedness under-identified. Most of the tests that we use were not created. They were created using mostly white males as the home group, and so everything's compared to them. And things that we know now about ADHD, and one of the few reasons that I was actually diagnosed is because I don't act like a typical girl with ADHD. I actually act like a typical boy with ADHD. I don't know why, but because of that, I got diagnosed appropriately back in the 80s. Most girls don't, because most girls are more internalizing. And so we don't always have good measures for them. And so what we start seeing, and what we talk about, especially as we get into secondary, is most girls who are not recognized as twice exceptional, especially until later, one of the things that we notice first with them is self-harm. And so when we start seeing gifted girls who are harming themselves, we can often start finding some of the underlying disabilities. Not that the work was too hard and it's causing them anxiety, but rather there's disabilities in there that we miss, that they've been masking this whole time. And their first way of really showing it to anybody is in acting out against themselves. So it's important to hear individual stories, and we will hear a lot of stories as we go through. I think it's super interesting to note that I'm going to say most of, without having actual evidence, but most of the researchers and speakers about twice exceptional are twice exceptional themselves. And I think it's really important to note that, because sometimes it's really hard to understand. And I even say it to myself, I say it to my husband, I say it to my daughter, we are a twice exceptional family if you don't know us. And you will hear stories about us, I'm sure, this whole time. It's really, really hard to see someone who knows what to do not do what they're supposed to do, and not attribute it to defiance or laziness. And especially when they are really bright and really verbally bright and they clap back real quick. And it's like, oh, you have the energy to come up with that response, but yet you don't have the energy to actually have done what you were doing in the first place. 100%. And whether our twice exceptional kids are, whether their disability is autism or ADHD or a specific learning disability or a comorbidity of multiple of those things, what brings all of our students together, that commonality is their giftedness. And even if their gifts are in different places, twice exceptional kids have profiles that are more similar to other gifted peers than they do to more of their peers, typical peers with a disability. And so if we use a gifted first approach to our students, it tends to meet their needs in a better way. When we get into our social emotional unit, we'll talk about this more, because what we have found is in our programs that we have for our discrete programs for our twice exceptional kids. So our kids who are in programs that are specific for twice exceptional kids, the social emotional learning curriculums that we used for them are curriculums that were written for gifted kids that we modified to meet the needs of their disabilities. When we use other programs that were made, like I'll use Unstuck and On Target as an example, it's a great executive functioning program, but it was written for children with autism. And while it has benefits for my kids, and my gifted kids with autism do fairly well using it, my gifted kids with specific learning disabilities don't. And my gifted kids with ADHD don't. And my gifted kids with emotional disabilities could care less. So, but when I use I'm Not Just Gifted curriculum, and then I modify it to meet the needs of those disabilities, it speaks more directly to the needs of our students. Ironically, there is no social emotional curriculum out there for twice exceptional kids, so everything has to be modified one way or the other. But what we have found is using those gifted first approaches and modifying on the back end for their needs addresses who they are as learners much better. Yes, I will share the link to the video. I actually meant to post it in the course and I didn't get around to that. So I showed it during class instead, but I will definitely get that posted. So I know some people said they weren't able to get into the Jamboard. So I would say if you are on there and you made your comment, if you can hop off and then let other people hop on, I think that'd be awesome. I just want to kind of click through here. I love all you people who are honestly telling me I'm just here for the credit. I am happy with that. Because you know what, that's why I take courses too. There's a reason that, oh my goodness, I am at Masters plus 72 now, just so you know. Like I still take courses. I'm, what's the word, a glutton for education and punishment. I do see a lot of, or quite a few of you who are parents of twice exceptional kids. I will share resources as we go for parents as well, because my little tag is I'm a twice exceptional person. What did I always say? Oh, I have a twice exceptional husband and a twice exceptional, oh, I'll come up with it later, I forget. Everything in my life is twice exceptional, including my brain today. Let's see. Thoughts on twice exceptional? Yeah, I see a couple of you guys have popped up the word neurodivergent. We will start to use that term a lot, and we'll probably talk about that in a few minutes, because I think it's a great term. And honestly, my hope is that someday the federal government will be useful and actually update the codes of disability, because the fact that ADHD falls under another health impairment code in the same category as like diabetes and epilepsy and all these other things. And then you have autism that's like its own, that has such a spectrum. I would love to see neurodiverse somehow come up, maybe not as a disability code, but just in a better defined way. And we will talk about what neurodiversity is. Question: how come TUI is not one of the disability codes for an IEP? Fantastic question. So twice exceptional is not a disability code, and I honestly will tell you I don't believe it should be, because a disability code is specifically identifying a disability. Twice exceptional is a profile. There is a wide range of what twice exceptional can be, and in the same way that that giftedness can be described in many different ways, what somebody is to be twice exceptional has a variety of different measures, and it's really hard to create a singular profile that you could measure and say, yes, this is a twice exceptional person. One of the people that I use as an example of this is actually one of the people I quoted on the homepage of our course, which is Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, who is one of his more recent books is A New Theory of Intelligence. Dr. Kaufman was blocked from all of the gifted programs when he was a child because his cognitive scores are in the impaired range. Any test he's taken or had taken previously showed that he has a cognitive disability, that he falls into the intellectual disability range. He has an auditory processing disorder, along with a couple of other things, and I'm pretty sure ADHD is in that mix. The man is utterly brilliant, but he couldn't express himself. And when he was in school, it was a time where you had to have, or schools districts could use cognitive scores to accept or unaccept students into things like AP courses. And he was not allowed to take AP courses because his cognitive scores were too low. He ended up going to Carnegie Mellon because he got in on an opera scholarship. He learned to be an opera singer. Remember, auditory processing disorder, but he learned to be an opera singer. He tried out and he was accepted to Carnegie Mellon as an opera major, and then soon after switched to psychology, and he now has his PhD from Yale, and and human intelligence is his area of thinking. And all of that is to say, Dr. Kaufman is very clearly twice exceptional. But if I use the more basic measures that I have to use in terms of what the system says for identifying a twice exceptional person, he would never be on my radar. And so when I talk to teams, and I actually just got asked this question today at the RIPSI meeting, and I am going to be doing some presentations, I think, on it this year. When we say a student is twice exceptional and we put it on an IEP or a 504, we say that they have a twice exceptional profile, because just like that board she showed where that was the audio board where all the levers go up and down, there's so many different combinations that can make a person twice exceptional that it's really hard to be able to code it in a specific way and in a way that will translate from district to district. Can twice exceptional students qualify for 504 plans? Absolutely. Twice exceptional students can be in any setting. And the vast majority, we have approximately 3,500 to 4,000 twice exceptional students in our district. By comparison, we have about 140 kids in our discrete program. There's a couple of reasons for that, but most of our twice exceptional kids are out and about. And of those 4,000 students, like 60% of them have 504s. Part of this is because it's a lot harder to get our twice exceptional kids with IEPs coded as gifted in our system. I'm working on that. That is one of my work plans. We've made a lot of progress within the county. But that is something that we are working on, is doing a better job of coding our gifted kids and our twice exceptional kids as gifted in our computer system. And then make kind of having those, but generally speaking, most of my twice exceptional kids have 504 plans. That said, I don't spend as much time with 504 teams. I think I've been to 2 504 meetings in the 6 years I've been in this job, because we're only talking about accommodations with 504s. It's a lot less, I'm going to go with the word confusing. Whereas when we're talking about IEPs and specially designed instruction, that just opens up such a world that people don't always know what to do with themselves. And so that's really a lot of times where I come in. How are the students identified officially? So that is kind of what we're talking about today, right? How do we know who these twice exceptional kids are? So a twice exceptional student can be a number of different things. We have a lot of definitions. On your module, you'll see my favorite definitions. And I really use these because they're my favorites, not because the other ones weren't good. I just really like these particular definitions. So Dr. Kaufman, Dr. Scott Mary Kaufman, I like his definition best, honestly. He says twice exceptional individuals demonstrate exceptional levels of capacity, competence, commitment, or creativity in one or more domains, coupled with one or more learning difficulties. This combination of exceptionalities results in a unique set of circumstances. Their exceptional potentialities may dominate, hiding the disability. Their disability may dominate, hiding the potentialities, and each may mask each other so that neither is recognized or addressed. Twice exceptional students are students who may perform at or above, may perform below, at, or above grade level. They require specialized methods of identification in order to consider possible interaction of exceptionalities. They require enriched and advanced educational opportunities that focus on developing the interests and the highest strengths while also meeting the learning needs, and require simultaneous supports that ensure the child's academic success and social emotional well-being. And that's the short version. I truncated a lot out of his definition. That's out of Twice Exceptional, Supporting and Educating Bright and Creative Students with Learning Disabilities, with Learning Difficulties. It's a long definition, but I like it because it brings me back to that point of why a profile. Because if I am talking about a student who is highly gifted and masking all of their disabilities, that's a kid who requires specialized methods of identification. That's probably a kid who is above grade level. And that's a kid who sometimes I'm being asked, why do they have an IEP then? If they're above grade level, if they are, we don't see any of their disability, why do they need the IEP? Well, let's go to that last one about simultaneous supports to ensure academic success and social emotional well-being. That speaks to my kids who are self-medicating, self-harming, who are bottling up all of what they feel are their inabilities or inequities. And we're not seeing them, but that doesn't mean they aren't there. We have our kids who are in who are in settings they're performing below grade level, their disability really is the first thing people see, and it's hiding what their gifted area of giftedness is. I think back to one of my favorite students. I have a lot of student stories too, not shockingly. I've actually had there's something about me, I attract a lot of selective mutes. Maybe it's because I talk so much, I don't know. But I have had quite a number of selective mute students over the years. And interestingly enough, most of my selective mute students, I am one of the few people they will talk to. And with all of those students, like when you were a selective mute, and specifically for a couple of them, when you were a selective mute to the point that they were a selective mute, you're not showing anything. And two of my three kids, actually, no, I'm going with all three of the kids I'm thinking of right now, also had writing phobias. Not just like writing difficulties or an expression difficulty, but true writing phobias. I had one kid who won't, to this day, he actually teaches my daughter at swim class now. I've kept up with him that long. He still won't touch a pencil. And so you know what, he's perfectly good at teaching swim. He is a perfectly good lifeguard. As long as somebody helps him fill out any paperwork that needs to happen, does great with his job. The funny thing is his sister is actually his boss right now. And I said that if he has to do written tests, they write for him. And I said, no, he has to put his name on the paper before you can write for him. That was always the rule with us. But he literally could shut down for hours if I tried to make him write anything. As a secondary English teacher, that was a really hard thing to work with. But the thoughts that come out of his mouth when he chooses to speak are amazing. The insights that he has into people, the insights he has into big picture thinking are incredible. But if you looked at him on the surface and you saw a kid who didn't talk to anybody, who wouldn't touch a pencil, who could literally wrap his toes, I still picture it, he wraps his toes around his chair and put his head down on his desk and not move for hours at a time. How do you talk about giftedness with that kid? And when I ask him, he's like, I don't know why I do it. I just did. And he still can't even articulate what was going through his head when he did that. I had another student, also a selective mute, also had a terrible writing phobia. I finally got him to do some writing his senior year because I was typing for him and I don't know what happened, but I like injured my hand. And I kept like moving it, and he came over and looked at my hand because it was pretty swollen. And he's like, doesn't that hurt? I said, yeah, but you need to graduate. He actually typed the rest of that paper himself, but I don't see it as like he was refusing to do it. But there was some impetus in there that he said, you know what, I can overcome it for a little while, because he knew that I was pushing myself so that he could actually graduate. When he went to college, his college looked at his profile, looked at his IEP and said, you know what, I think freshman English can wait. And he took all upper level math and computer science classes in his freshman year so that he could have a good start, because they knew when he was going to get to those advanced courses or rather those basic courses in writing, he was going to struggle, and they wanted time to come up with a plan. And it was actually their disability coordinator, I spoke to her before he went to school there, was a former school psychologist and understood what we were talking about and understood the IEP and understood what he was going through, and was able to work with him in a way that a lot of people can't. So when we talk about that disability hiding that giftedness, again, it's a real impact, because that particular child took pre-calculus over the summer so that he could skip calculus, AB calculus, and go straight to BC calculus as a junior, because that's what he felt like doing. I still can't wrap my brain around that one. But again, the writing piece was just so difficult for him. And then we have our kids who end up looking what we would just call average. We have our kids who the disability and the giftedness kind of just bounce off each other, and just like in the video where she said they don't cancel each other out, but they kind of cancel each other out in that you don't see the kid as gifted or as having a disability. I've had quite a number of students in recent years, and in fact I have one that we just coded recently where all of the child's testing is coming out as average. We don't know why. We literally cannot explain why. All of the grades come out as kind of in that average range, but yet when you meet the child, when you talk to them, when you start thinking about, areas of leadership and creativity and all those like other more intangible pieces of giftedness, the child just shines, but can't get more than average on a test to save his life. So, and yes, these are mostly boy examples, and I apologize for that. But, you know, I actually had to go out and do some research when we were talking about coding the student for their disability, but also identifying their area of giftedness, because I can't just point to a test score and say this kid is clearly gifted. And so instead, I went out and I found, and some of the research on that is really old because people haven't delved into it more, which is probably going to end up being what I do my PhD in, because we were able to find questions that the team could ask themselves and answer to explain the child's giftedness, to explain, yes, this is a gifted student who just isn't looking very gifted right now, but has all these amazing abilities that just don't come across on test scores. So that was a super simple answer, right? So all of those things we call masking, because it's all one thing on top of another thing that's hiding what it is that we're looking for. And that is like the biggest marker of a twice exceptional kid, is one way or another they're wearing a mask. They are either, they're masking one, the other, or both. And the social and the big reason that we dig into this, you know, because again, another question is, well, if they're masking it, then why do we need to address it? If they're able to, you know, mask the giftedness, don't we need to just address the disability? If they're masking the disability, well, the giftedness is supporting it. It keeps coming back for me to that social emotional well-being. Masking takes a huge emotional toll. And and when you hear stories, especially from adults who have spent their lives masking or figuring out what's going on with them, we don't hear about grades from adults. We don't hear about, you know, whether or not they came out on top of a test or whatever. You always have bits and pieces, but what we hear about the most is the emotional toll, the self-image, the belief that they can do something. The number of kids that we've had who, when we first identify them, don't think that they're capable of anything academically, but once we start giving them the tools to talk about what their needs are, or we give them the tools to overcome what their disability is, they open up and they shine. I have a student right now who reads on a, at best, kindergarten level. Clearly needs support because the student is also in multivariable calculus. We had to get multivariable calculus through Bookshare so that the student could listen to the calculus book, because I can't have someone sit there necessarily and read a calculus book to them. They need access to their book. They're doing, is it nonlinear algebra? Is the next step after that, or differential equations is what they're going to be taking this year. And we have to go get the books through Bookshare or one of those groups, because the child cannot read the problems to answer the question. But this is the level of math that they're taking right now. Is the child in a reading intervention? Absolutely not. Could they benefit from a reading intervention? Possibly. But I'd much rather the student take wildlife biology and AP Chem or physics. They all look the same to me. But I'd much rather our students take those courses that are interesting and advanced than sit in a remedial class where they learn some basic skills. I know the student did a summer course last summer where actually had to get on a plane and go to the Virgin Islands. They got a scholarship into a program, and one of the things they had to do was pass the scuba diving test, and they couldn't read any of the questions. And the person did give them, you know, a little bit of the read to support, but still had to write their own answers. And they did pass the scuba test, so they were able to participate in the marine biology pieces. And on their way home, their flight got canceled and they had to navigate their way through New York. It was the first time we really had a test about whether or not this child could read enough to get through life. And the fact that they made it back home safe, we kind of went, we're okay with them not having a reading intervention right now, because the basic reading skills, the child used an app to read things that they couldn't read, or they used a translator device, whatever they needed to do, were able to navigate so that they could come home and take multivariable calculus. So when we're working with our kids and saying, well, why are we providing these supports? As extreme as some of these cases seem, these are our everyday. These are the kids I deal with all the time. As unique as they are in the population, they are my entire world. And so I see how all these different intersectionalities come together. And then my job becomes to not only let you guys know that these kids exist, because that's part of the reason you're here, but also what can we do to make our classrooms more accessible and our instruction more accessible so that we can make sure that they're included appropriately in academics and education. I did see one question on here about like, how do we officially identify a twice exceptional student? So we joke I have a magic wand and I tap them on the head and that makes them twice exceptional. That gives them their magic label. Actually, I have one person, I don't know if they're here tonight. I won't call them out if they are. No, I think tonight was the class they were missing. So I have one person tonight that their project actually for this course is supposed to be looking into whether or not we have enough. Can we put a twice exceptional flag in Synergy? Yes. Or performance matters, whatever, same thing. Can we do it? Yes. Is it worthwhile to do it? I don't know. That's what their research project is going to be. Because one thing, again, that I know is that we can't really, like, the only way I can look up kids is to be able to say, yes, this child is identified as gifted. Yes, this child has a 504 or identified as gifted and has an IEP, and I could pull numbers and add them together. We know that misses a huge chunk of children. So then I just do a statistical thing where I take into account how often kids are missed and how often they're under-identified. And I use a couple of formulas that exist out there and we all pray my math is right. And then I come up with my number. So that's why I'm in that 3,000 to 4,000 range. Is it worth having a twice exceptional flag in the system to identify a kid as twice exceptional? Obviously, I think so, but the powers that be don't necessarily agree with me, and I can understand why, because once you start flagging one thing, how many things are you going to flag? At the same time, it's such a unique profile. Maybe it is something we need to talk about, and maybe we would do a better job of identifying. So because I don't know the answer to that, and I'm okay with that, we don't have a way to identify them now. The way teams identify the student, we have some checklists and tools. Sometimes they bring me out, sometimes they take classes like this and we talk it out and make a decision and we write it onto the 504 plan or we write it into the IEP. And we will say this child has a twice exceptional profile. This child has characteristics of a twice exceptional learner. Depending on what it is the kid actually has, that's what we identify, and that's what we would put on their official documentation to say they are twice exceptional. There is no magic potion, and people will say kids are twice exceptional without my opinion, and they're welcome to do so. We have people in our county who are experts in twice exceptional, and I trust implicitly the decisions they make. We have some people who they look at it and like an outside person, they get a report and then the report says this kid is twice exceptional. I'm generally okay with that as long as that isn't a direct, this kid is twice exceptional, thus they get an IEP. That's not the conversation. The conversation needs to be this kid is twice exceptional. Do their needs show that they have a need for specially designed instruction and they require an IEP? As long as you're not using one to get to the other, again, there's a lot of gray area in our discussion. But I think as long as it's a team discussion and everybody is bringing together real data as well as anecdotal data to talk about what the actual profile of the student is, a child can be identified in a multitude of different ways. If we want to officially identify them as gifted and they haven't been identified as gifted through the system process, there is a way to do that as well. Currently, the easiest way is you call me and I walk you through it, because depending on what school you're at and what level you're at, the answer is different. There's different people, elementary school versus middle school. For special ed teams, some of it we are changing the process in my office because the system we currently have sucks. So if it's easier to say call Sarah, just call Sarah and then we'll go from there. And I will direct people back into, you talk to this person, this person, this person. But it's also easier for me to say, okay, at that school, you talk to that person and they have the link and you're going to do this. We're also starting to do more work with our school psychologists. I've had a lot of good meetings this year with Michelle Palmer, who is one of the coordinators for the psychologists for across the county. And school psychologists have a huge role in Twice Exceptional. And there's actually a couple of programs that are coming out right now that are specifically geared towards school psychologists learning more about Twice Exceptional and learning how to interpret a lot of the tests that we do so that they can look into those subtests and those things that they do and better understand the Twice Exceptional profile. Because after the special educator and the general educator, the psychologist is the most important person at the table who will understand what Twice Exceptional means, because they bring in that lens of all those other tests that we use, that we pull together. And right now it's a lot of me using teacher lay terms to talk to psychologists. And my goal is to get more psychologists trained so they can speak psychologists to each other and have those conversations and be able to make really good decisions because they have the information at their fingertips. I think those are kind of the broadest questions that you guys sent out. Some of the other stuff in here, how do we support the inclusive classrooms? That is definitely what we're going to move towards. Let me check our messages on here real quick. Got the Jamboard. I will share that. Thank you for sharing. To the person who told me about their selective mute child, I want to share that one of my great claims to fame was my second year in our system. I worked in the bridge program, and I had my selective mute child came in second place in the spelling bee for the school. Still mute. And the agreement was that he wrote everything out on his whiteboard. He had less of a writing phobia than some of my other kids did, but he would write it out on his whiteboard, and like he couldn't hesitate. He couldn't go back and correct, because when we spell in a spelling bee, you spell. If you pause, you have to continue from where you can't repeat yourself. You can't go back and make changes. So that was like the rule. The way that we would spell verbally, he would spell in writing, because we said that if a child were deaf, that's how they would spell with sign language. And so, and none of the kids, and I think one of the worries that people have is like, oh, the other kids will think it's not fair. Well, the only other kid who thought it wasn't fair was another kid in the bridge program who came in fifth place and lost to him in the classroom. And so, fair. I understand why she was upset, but truthfully, it was the right thing to do. And he did an amazing job. And that's an example of the way we accommodate our kids, our Twice Exceptional kids, so that they can have a similar school experience to their peers and that they can show their giftedness despite their disabilities. Yes, there is a Twice Exceptional handbook. The Fairfax County one is based off of ours. We were first. The first handbook came out in 1997. The most recent handbook from MCPS came out in 2015. One of my life projects right now is to do the latest edition of the handbook. It desperately needs to be done. And so either now or at the end, if you are interested in being part of my team to revamp our handbook, please let me know. And frankly, if that wants to be your project, you think that sounds like fun, you want to take a section of the handbook and redo it, or write the section on Twice Exceptional EMLs that doesn't exist at all right now, let me know. I'm happy to make that a project for you. So this is what I am going to do, because like I said, I have not taught this as a 2-hour block before. And if you're anything like me, which I don't know, but we've all established I have ADHD, I have issues, I'm going to hit pause on the recording. I'm going to give us, does a 5-minute break sound good? Bathroom, stretch, water, whatever. I had soup for dinner, so I'm definitely going to run. 5 minutes sound good to everybody? Awesome. So I will see you back at 8:06. Verizon says 8:06. So I will see everybody back then. Oh. So one of the comments that I got, or questions that I got during the break, was about what percentage do I think are unrecognized? So I think that actually leads us into a great segue conversation, which would be to look at what the law says. So even though it's not funded, and gifted funding is something I could go off for hours about, gifted education is not funded in Maryland. And I will say sometimes I use gifted and advanced learner interchangeably. They are different things, but unless I'm differentiating and telling you something one way or the other, I might use them interchangeably. So gifted or advanced education is not specifically funded in Maryland, but it is required to be recognized and programmed for by law. It is in COMAR. Specifically, it's in section 13 and section 7 for the job position. Like, the job position of gifted specialist actually exists in the state of Maryland as of 2019. And as of 2019, the law says that each school district must identify 10% of the population at a minimum as gifted. So what does that look like exactly? So I do say, to be fair, that all of my data right now is pre-pandemic, because I just haven't had the time or energy to update it since then. So we're looking at 2019 data, or early 20, sorry, possibly, I may have updated some of this in January of 2020. Let me go back to sharing. Okay, so per COMAR, well, let me actually go back up here. So also, please appreciate my background, because I love this background and I can only get away with it in settings like this. So in 2019, the state of Maryland made it part of the law that we have to do universal screening. So prior to 2019, districts could choose how they wanted to go about screening for giftedness. And up until 2015 in MCPS, it was a parent application or teacher recommendation approach. We changed that approach around 2015, and we went with a universal screening process, which basically is that almost all students starting in second grade are screened for giftedness, and parents can opt out, but they don't have to sign in. And one of the biggest things that did was it changed the diversity of our gifted identification. Everything in a system as large as ours, we know, is so hard to navigate and so bureaucratic. And when we add in things like socioeconomic status barriers, language barriers, have time to comb through thousands of pages of MCSPS policy barriers, it made it really, really hard for parents who weren't in the know to know how to have their children recognized. By taking out that barrier and making it open for everybody from the get-go, we increased the diversity of our population as well as our overall population. So in 2019, the official law for Maryland says that the process must be a universal screening. We must use multiple indicators of potential, ability, and achievement. That it must be a minimum of 10% for each local school system. We have to do the first round of identification before grade 3, and we have to offer additional screening somewhere in the 3 through 5 band and the 6 through 9 band. So as of, like I said, 2019, this is where, actually, no, before we get there, let me talk about this screen first. So one question that we will get is, well, where does that 10% come from? So the 10% is somewhat research-based in that there's a lot of different research on what constitutes giftedness, as I've said. The model that I use to explain it, I think most clearly, is the one on the screen right now, where I'm looking at what different researchers who are very well known in our field say about giftedness. So it is like in any situation where we're talking about profound, severe profound, gifted and profound, profoundly gifted, we're talking a very small percentage of the population. So according to Barbara Clark, we are looking at about less than 1 to 2% of the population. So 1.9 is what looks nice on my screen, but basically 2% of our population would be considered to be highly gifted, or even profoundly gifted, and they tend to be more than 1%. Joseph Renzulli, based on his talent development models, said that the number for giftedness in a population could fall between 10 and 12%. And so again, we're talking about looking at a whole population that about 10 to 12% of a population is gifted. So gifted is falling into that top 90th percentile range within the population. Renzulli then goes on to talk about a talent development pool. And the theory behind the talent development pool that really gets us into those advanced learners. These are students or people in general who, with the right instruction and the right exposure, can show signs of giftedness, high potential, possibly not giftedness, but very strong. So those become our advanced learners, our kids who do really well in certain areas and certain classes. They might not be gifted learners, but they are advanced learners and they need a different type of instruction and support. And then the remaining percentage, we could continue to break it down, but essentially that's what we call the rest of our population, is that 60% who aren't falling into those advanced categories, or who are very good students, they're good learners, it's just not their area of strength. So based on those broad numbers, Marilyn said that we need to have a minimum or at least 10% of the population identified. So when we looked at MCPS data in 2019, we see that we have at about, I used that right off the top of my head, but we're really hovering right around 18% identified as gifted. So we are within our margin. As obviously we break it down over different special populations, our farms population is somewhat close. Because again, when we talk about gifted as a school system, we meet that standard. But when we talk about 10% in a given population, that's when we start looking at some of these subpopulations to see, are we identifying at least 10% of our our farm students as gifted? Are we identifying, and no, they're, I think, 8 or 9%. LEP, as it was written at the time, our EML learners, they are at 0.09% or 0.9%. Special education is about 2%. Title I is around 8%. Interestingly, we are pretty much 50-50 with gender. We will talk more about gender when we get into our equity groups, because there's a lot of really interesting information, especially when we talk about the LGBTQ+ community and giftedness. So I will save that talk for another day, but we are essentially 50-50 when it comes to this population. When we break it down by race, we see a whole nother picture here. So again, while we were at 10% or 12% or so for our whole population, when we are looking at it by individual race population, we obviously see that identified Asian, identified multiracial, and identified Caucasian are significantly over. So this is when it becomes, do I have this on here? I do. This is when it becomes important to talk about our talent pools. So 10% is the yellow line. That is what the state says that we should be. The next line here is the line of what MCPS is as a whole. So again, that 12.5% or so, we're falling. I'm sorry, that's the Renzulli number. That is this population here is falling here. And then when we talk about a talent development pool, that was that top 20-25% where we are applying specific instruction exposure to support learning and learning as gifted learners and being advanced learners. And what we are seeing is that even with the talent support numbers, we still have 3 categories that are way over identified as gifted. And so, and then it also becomes more glaring when we have certain number of populations that are under-identified. African American is identified as at, I think it was at 9.9% at the time I pulled these numbers, but that's not near the 12% for Enzoli, and it's nowhere near the talent development. The same is true for our Hispanic Latino population, but again, in these three other populations, we see a lot of over-identification. So when we're talking about how many twice exceptional students are under-identified, I would go back to this number here and say, if we say that 10% of a given population, in this case, it is a given population of students with IEPs, identified as gifted, there is a gap in there. Do I feel comfortable saying, we need to identify X number of kids more? No. But what I do feel comfortable saying is that we under-identify our gifted special ed population. And this is when, the numbers become important, that the only way I can pull this data on the screen is if we pull identify and performance matters, kids with IEPs, kids are identified as gifted. I know I've got a ton of kids out there. I pulled numbers recently. My twice exceptional program, like I said, I have about 140 kids right now, and about a third of them are not identified as gifted in our system. They're gifted, that's why they're in my program, but they're not identified as gifted in the system. So when I pull this number up, they're not there. So part of it, our lack of identification, is not even that we don't know that they exist, it's just that they're not flagged in the system. And that's where we come back to that question of, is it worthwhile to have another identifying marker? Again, I think yes, because I find it important, but I think it's more important that we appropriately identify gifted kids as gifted in our system, so that things that are basically data management errors are not causing part of the problem of identification. So I hope that kind of answered the question that I was asked about percentage of under-recognized for twice exceptional. We will definitely get more into those numbers around race and gender when we get into our equity unit. But that's just also kind of foundational information, I think, for where we are as a school system. Another piece that I talked about, and this is something that I am fighting very hard for, and it came up a couple times this year. And in fact, one of the reasons it came up was somebody who took my class in the spring said, wait a minute, this is what you said in class, but this is not what we're doing in MCPS. And they're right. And I brought it up to my boss, who said, you're right. One of the allowances that the state makes is that we can identify schools, specific schools in the system that are not considered as a part of our percentage. And the three primary schools that we would talk about in MCPS would be Stephen Knowles, Longview, and Rock Terrace. So those are our students who are on alternative learning outcomes. Many of them have cognitive disabilities that are identified as cognitive disabilities. And so when we look at our percentages, the students in those who are in those schools are not a part of that percentage. So we are talking about the 10% of the population excluding that specific group. But it does include our kids in the learning centers. It does include ALO students or other students who are in SCB programs, LFI programs, other programs like that. But it does not, but one thing we were not doing in MCPS is screening those students. And so some of it is politics, some of it is money. But the question that I got from my specific learning center person who was taking the course was, why are our kids not part of that universal screening? It's a great question. We're still trying to navigate an answer. And I'll say we're trying to navigate an answer because we end up with two very distinct camps. We have camp number one that says all universal is universal, everybody should get screened. That's a pretty obvious statement. We have camp number two that says, I am already aware that my child has a disability. My child is identified as having a cognitive disability. I do not need yet another piece of mail from MCPS telling me my child's not gifted. I'm aware. And I feel for those parents because, you're aware. You guys have had those conversations. Or we have the parents who are like, why are you even having this? Why is my child even coming up in this? There's no point into it. It's not even that they don't want another thing being told. They're like, that's just a waste of paper, time, and energy. So we are in discussions about what the best approach for this is. My personal opinion at this point is I think universal is universal, but I think that we should tell parents and maybe be more specific with certain populations. If you don't want your child screened, there is an opt-out option, and that is true for any child at any grade in any setting. Parents can opt out of identification. I just think for some of our populations where that comes up more frequently, of like, we're not comfortable with this, please don't tell me again my child's not gifted, make sure they understand they have the opportunity to opt out. But I am one voice in many voices, and I think the more important part is that we are bringing more players to the table to have this discussion. And I'm pushing really hard to have not only parent representation, but also more people from special education and from psychology coming in as a part of our identification discussion, so that we can give a best practice answer, because none of the answers are perfect. So really my question is, how are we going to best identify our kids? And when I get questions like, well, do the kids at Carl Sandburg really need to be screened? Yeah, because when we talk about, especially settings like learning centers, those are kids who are behind in performance. It doesn't mean that they're cognitively impaired. It means, excuse me, that they're 2 or more years below. But just because a student is below, as we know with masking, doesn't mean they aren't gifted, doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of potential cognitive ability. I have had kids come out of Learning Center to Twice Exceptional. I have had kids come out of Sandburg and go to what was formerly the Asperger's program, it's now called the Connections program. And it was a discussion about whether or not they were more appropriate to come to me. And in the end, it was what was driving the services were the social needs. And that's why we went with the Connections program instead of Twice Exceptional. But that's happened 3 times with kids out of Carl Sandburg. Program, we always say code doesn't drive placement for special education. Code doesn't drive placement for gifted identification either. And we need to make sure that we are very universal in that approach. And so that is where my advocacy currently falls. But I also am always happy to have more people at the table, and I'm always happy to hear differing opinions. And, you know, we have some of these questions on our discussion board that will come up about what these processes look like or could look like, or other things that we should be considering. I think the last area that I want to get into today, when we talk about like the see a good question. Why am I continuing? So the question that popped up on the board, why are we continuing to under-identify the over-identified in need of special education racial groups? That is a hello loaded question. There's a lot of reasons. And again, you know, it's a little bit serendipitous that this is happening on top of the RITSI meeting, because we had a whole presentation today on autism, emotional disabilities, multiple disabilities, and the processes that we use to identify kids who have those codes. We know that Black and Brown students are way over identified in terms of emotional disability code, and we know they are way under identified in terms of giftedness. I have made and continue to make the argument that if we are seeing children who are having behavior problems, who we have concerns about, who, you know, they're bright, but their attitude just, they won't learn, they can't learn, they don't, blah, blah, blah. I'm a huge proponent of cog testing those kids, giving cognitive testing to those students. I know it's a lot of work. I know it's extra work on the psychologist, but I genuinely believe we will see a shift in how we're identifying students if we don't see a Black boy acting up and automatically assume it's an emotional disability and a behavior disorder. And instead we think, maybe this is a gifted kid who is bored out of their minds and has ADHD and isn't controlling the impulsivity of whatever's coming out of their mouth. And instead, we need to challenge them more appropriately and give them the opportunity to shine instead of constantly looking at things like talking back, or insubordination is a big one. All gifted kids are insubordinate. It's basically part of the profile, but why do some kids get away with it and other kids don't? To me, that's a much more important question. So I hear what the team is saying when they say, you know, if you really suspect it's an emotional condition, if you really suspect that they have whatever issues that they're having, you don't have to do a cognitive test. You're right, you don't have to do a cognitive test, but make sure we're asking the question, make sure we're trying to look at a child through multiple lenses, because I think if we keep pushing hard and asking those questions and having uncomfortable conversations with ourselves, I think it's important that we force those questions out as a group and when we make our decisions about what it is that we're doing. One of the children I referenced earlier, where I said all of his scores are coming up as blah, as average, but we know this kid is gifted. He is an African American boy, and when we start talking about where his strengths are and where he really shines, and you know, like those things that fall more in the realm of creativity and leadership, in his ability to suddenly go, oh, I really should get that done, and then get it done in like 30 seconds. Those are all indicative of gifted twice exceptional students. It's just this simple set of test scores that's not showing it. But the original code that the child had was emotional disability. We changed that, I think, just recently to OHI for the ADHD. This is a child, an African American boy, who has been coded for the last 6 or 7 years as an emotional disability, and it's not an emotional disability. It's a masked, gifted child who talks back way too much because he's gifted, and all my kids talk back way too much. And it's fortunate that we picked it up now, but the child's also in high school. You know, that's a long time to be misidentified. I have another student that we also just changed the code for. He's in 8th grade now. We tried to change the code, and the team that I worked with back in elementary school was adamant. And so he went into middle school with an ED code. And within a year, the middle school team told me there's no way. We waited because he was in the right place and was getting the support he needed. We've now changed his code to represent the ADHD, and the emotional disability code is off. I have another child who is getting ready to go into middle school, and we're going to be having the same conversation next year. And all of these students are African American boys, and they are gifted boys. And they are boys who snap back and talk back the same amount all my other kids do, but they're African American boys. And for me, it's a real area of, this is why we have to do our due diligence. This is why we have to acknowledge our biases and acknowledge what we know to be true about inequality, what we know to be true about we can't keep throwing up our hands going, why are there so many kids over-identified? We know why they're over-identified. So instead of throwing up our hands, let's say we know this is a child that is typically going to be over-identified. We need to say, what else are we missing? Let's make sure we're not missing other things. I'll step off my soapbox now, but that's really where a lot of that comes from. And the way for us to be disruptors of that system is to make decisions that might make more work for the adults, that might lead to some uncomfortable conversations at the table, but allow us to see our kids in a broader and better light so that we can get them the services they actually need. All right, I think I'm done with my rant there. So last area that I really kind of wanted to get into tonight also has to do with the legal, the federal pieces of where twice exceptional falls within the law. Twice exceptional does not fall in the law, just so you know, not there. Nobody talks about it. However, there are some important pieces of Supreme Court cases that have come through, as well as some what we call letters to the public, or dear colleague letters that have been put out by MSDE, not MSDE, US Department of Ed, that talk about what our obligations are to our gifted learners in where our obligations are to gifted learners with disabilities, with different what I'm looking for, different learning plans, different codes. So one of the biggest decisions to come down in recent years is the Supreme Court case Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District. You will get to do this if you've done your admin cert, you've heard of this case. If you've been in IEP meetings with me, you've heard of this case. And essentially, I'm gonna pause this for a second because I really need to blow my nose and I think I'll be able to talk for the rest of the time. Hang on one second. All right, so the Andrew F. decision, 2017. Andrew F. is not a twice exceptional student. However, pieces that came out of this particular case, which you guys can read about more in the module, one of the biggest and most important pieces that came out of this case was that we need to provide for children in light of circumstances, in light of the child's circumstances. So the legal measurement for progress on an IEP for students has been merely more than de minimis, which means more than the minimum. Well, we all know if the minimum is here, there's a lot of space between the minimum and the top. It is not saying that every kid needs a perfect education or a private school education or the best education possible, but it was saying that it needed to be more than the minimum. Well, that's lovely. The decision of the court for the Andrew F. decision was that a child's progress needs to be reasonably calculated to be appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. For Andrew F. specifically, this was about a lot about behavior progress and his progress as a functioning child. But where it becomes appropriate for us with our twice exceptional kids comes back to that question of a lot of times of grade level, but also of the social emotional well-being pieces, because the court specifically had said, the court previously in Rowley had said that it needs to be reasonably calculated that the educational benefit is more than the minimum. And it also had said, wow, I really thought my brain was functioning a little better, but apparently not. So basically what they ended up saying was it needs to be more than the minimum. It needs to be appropriate based on who the child is. We aren't going to set a number and say it has to be this or it has to be this. But what we are saying is if a child should be able to do more, we need to set their progress based on what we think they can do, and we need to make our measurement based on what we think they can do and not based on whatever the minimum amount of progress they need to make is. So when we're starting to look at what it is, we talk about reasonable calculation. And so for our twice exceptional kids, sometimes what that will look like is, and I understand why this can be hard for people to wrap their heads around some. If I have a student who has a really high verbal IQ, and their writing is average or barely average, there's a gap in performance there. Yes, the child is average. Maybe they're even writing mostly on grade level, but they're not writing where their abilities should be, and that is a deficit. And so we have to look at that child and say, well, what is the deficit? Is it that they can't organize their thoughts and we need to give them more support and organization? Is it that their spelling is so atrocious that they choose to use words like bad instead of atrocious because atrocious has a lot of letters in it? What is it that is acting as the barrier for our student? And then what specialized instruction are we using in order to overcome what that barrier is? When we're talking about a student who's below grade level, it's a pretty clear cut, the grade level standard is this, and they're not doing it, we need to get them here. But when we're looking at it in terms of what the student's actual abilities are, what we're looking at is the student has demonstrated they should be able to do this, but they are regularly doing this. What do we do to bridge that gap? And then we really focus in on what that looks like. And if you go into grade level standards, and it's painful, I hold that for sure. But when we really dig into what state standards are for education, I would be hard pressed to find a lot of kids who are meeting state standards, especially when we're looking at, I'm an English teacher at heart. So, when I go into the standards and I look at, they should be able to define how M dash versus an N dash is being used. They should know how to properly use ellipses. Please show me a 10th grader who knows the difference between an M dash and N dash and how to use ellipses and parentheses. They all need something. But more to the point, there's always something in the grade level that we can use as a basis for bringing our children's writing up. So if what they need to work on is better word choice because they are writing really simplistic basic sentences because they don't want to have to spell words poorly or because they're trying to be one and done, then our goal needs to focus on academic vocabulary and proper incorporation of academic vocabulary. It could focus on complex sentences or understanding the difference between simple compound and compound complex sentences. If I have to write one more goal on compound complex sentences, my head will explode. But the point is that for our students, they're capable of doing that. And if they're giving you a lot of bulleted answers or short answers because they don't have whatever is missing to get those answers out, that is where their area is. It could play out in science or social studies that, they're not filling out their lab reports or they're being inaccurate in their lab reports because they're not using the right vocabulary. So we're starting to look at them and say, okay, well, this is what vocabulary we're going to use. When we look at math, I am not saying that math fluency is not important. Please do not mishear me. But if the only thing that's keeping you from being in pre-calculus or honors pre-calc is a calculator because your calculation ability is kind of weak, give the child a flipping calculator. Yes, you need to learn, but you also, if you're moving through concepts so quickly and the thing that's holding you back is your actual ability to calculate, that is a calculation issue. Give the kid a calculator so that they can continue to make progress. Don't be the barrier. Don't make basic pieces. The same way that if a student types better than they write, we let them write on the computer now. That used to be a big fight. Even just a few years ago, getting Chromebooks and laptops into the classroom to let our kids type answers was a huge barrier. I feel like in some ways calculators are a similar barrier. We're doing a little bit better. And yes, they do need to learn. I don't say that we don't need to do that practice, but don't let it be a barrier for progress either. Make it, you can do that work supplementally. And it might be that they have a math goal that has them practicing basic calculation skills once or twice a week in their resource class, but they're in the advanced class when it comes to the actual conceptual work that they're doing, and they're using a calculator to succeed there. Again, the Intro F case was also focused on behavior. And I think this is kind of what it comes back to with a lot of our students when we start looking at some of those social emotional pieces. And in our next section, when we talk about social emotional, we're going to get into asynchronous development. But one thing to note with our students is that they can look like multiple ages at once. They can be intellectually in college and emotionally at 3 years old. And they're actually standing in front of us as a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 42-year-old. And it's all over the place. And sometimes the social emotional work is the barrier to their ability to be on grade level in the classroom. They might have all their academic, and this is an argument I get into a lot with teams. Educational impact is not necessarily academic impact. Educational impact is their ability to access education. Education includes making friends, being friends, participating in the group, talking to people appropriately, being able to integrate themselves into multiple settings across their day. If we have a student who is brilliant and can't talk to a single person, and not because they're a selective mute, but rather because they just see no value in other people, they see no value in conversation, a lot of times yes, we have to learn not to call other people stupid. No, we know their opinion counts too. It has value. You actually have to listen to what your peer said. They actually might have a right answer that's different from your answer. It is possible that you are wrong, by the way. Those are conversations that are real daily conversations sometimes with our students. And that might be what their goals are. I have a lot of students whose goal is I will listen to what somebody else has to say and provide an appropriate response that acknowledges their position. It's a perspective taking piece, but for a kid who's not on the autism spectrum, like a kid with ADHD, sometimes it's a goal for them too, because between the impulsivity and some of the other social pieces that come with ADHD, they just simply don't value anybody else's opinion because they're always right. And when they're gifted in ADHD, they are usually right, and they can't really cope with the idea that they're not right. And if you are right and they are wrong, that can lead to a serious meltdown. It can lead to, usually with girls, internalizing and boys externalizing. But either way, it's a behavior problem. And that's usually why my consults come in for behavior problems. But it's not a behavior problem. It's that they need some social skills and social emotional instruction on learning how to talk to other people, learning how to hear other people, learning how to hear what somebody else has to say and incorporate it into their own worldview, and then live life from there. So I don't think it's unusual for I will go back also officially. 6 days ago, we officially became the Twice Exceptional program with MCPS. We have been GTLD up to this point. And one of my biggest arguments for why we needed to be the Twice Exceptional program is for this profile of student. They don't have academic goals, but they have special education needs because they cannot appropriately interact with their peers or with adults their own age. A lot of times they're fine with older kids or they're fine with younger kids, but within their own age group, they really struggle. And so a lot of their goals have to do with that social emotional interaction piece. The other piece for a lot of twice exceptional kids, whether or not they have ADHD, executive functioning and executive dysfunction is a huge component of the twice exceptional profile. And executive functioning covers a lot. It's not just organization. And that is a constant refrain of mine. Executive functioning is more than organizing your binder, because it is self-regulation. It is organizing, it's prioritizing. It's, the person in our video said she couldn't apply for college because she lost track of deadlines. That's something that some of my kids have goals for. That's actually a part of what we do. And I might call her out at some point in time, because one of my last class, I had like 6 of my case managers take the class. This time I only have 1, so I'm trying really hard not to just completely call her out. But I'm hoping at some point she'll talk to us about what she does in her resource class, because one of the things that we do in our high school resource classes is help our kids manage those goals and deadlines, not manage them so that we do it, but teach them, guys, it's the beginning of your junior year. We got to start back mapping this. Teaching the skills of back mapping is a huge component for twice exceptional kids. Self-advocacy and being able to stand up for yourself without insulting other people or without insulting yourself is another big area for our students. So as we are going through the identification process, and as we're talking about what is the educational impact for a twice exceptional kid, it's not just about whether or not they have A's and B's, it's whether or not they are functioning human beings, and whether or not they are absolutely killing themselves to look perfect at school and then completely melting down in other locations. And I say this with a caveat, I understand IEPs are for school and we can't dictate home behavior. But if a student is feeling so intensely that they have to be perfect at school, that everything has to be perfect and done on time, and everything has to look a certain way, and they can't ask for help, and they can't do this, and they can't do that, and they're holding everything so rigidly during the school day that they just completely melt down into nothing at home, that is a school problem, because that's telling me that they're not comfortable in the school setting, that they feel like they have a trusted adult that they can go to, that they feel like they're allowed to make a mistake without having their entire world blow up. So it's a fine line to walk for sure, because we also have kids who just home life is tough and they have a lot of behaviors at home. And I will use my child as the perfect example of this. I don't know if y'all heard her screaming about 20 minutes ago. When they came home from the pool, I'm pretty sure her dad told her she had to wash her hands before she had dinner. And that was leading to the screaming. That's not a school problem. I know she's stressed because today was the first day of summer school. And so it was a different day for her. And she has a new teacher who she already knows. She's going to her school, but it was a new day. But she doesn't need an IEP for that. I recognize that even though she's having that meltdown because of school, that's not what that is. But I also know that she feels comfortable talking to her teachers and telling her teachers what's going on. She's not holding that perfectionism at school and then melting down on me at home. So learning to kind of walk that line and look at both sides and really see what it is that our kids are presenting is a big part of our identification process. And then also our process for what their specialized instruction might look like. Because it might not be support in an academic classroom, or it might be support to help them prioritize what they're working on and getting themselves together. And that is specialized instruction. And then they're not necessarily getting pulled out. It might be pulling them out to do some social emotional instruction for them. There's a lot of different ways that this will look. And that really does come back to that Supreme Court case of, more than minimum in light of circumstances. Because to me, in light of circumstances, opens up the world to what it means to support a twice exceptional kid and what it means for our twice exceptional kids to get support. This was all about IDEA, so it does not impact 504s. I don't get as many questions about 504s. If we have them, I'm happy to answer them. If I don't know, I'm happy to research it. But that court case right there really shifted what our world could possibly look like for our twice exceptional kids. The other thing I mentioned was the Dear Colleague letters. So in 2007, a letter was put out by the U.S. Department of Education. Again, it doesn't say anything helpful necessarily. It's not like, yes, you have to let the kids do this. But it did talk about what it meant to put up barriers for kids who have IEPs or 504s and being able to access AP classes. And the summary of what the letter said and what other follow-up letters have said is when it comes to IB and AP courses, we are required to provide the IEP regardless of what College Board or IB give as accommodations on their tests. So I go around and around and around with this with AP folks, especially, mostly just because we have more kids with IEPs taking AP classes than we do IB. I will talk about IB in a hot second. We ran into, and especially when I started in 2014 in the high school, ran into a whole lot of AP teachers who would tell me, well, they're not going to get that on their AP exam, and I have to prepare them for the exam, so I'm not giving them those accommodations. That is illegal. There's no two ways to look about it. That is illegal because they are enrolled in a public school course, and the public school is required to give them their IEP supports. Now, like everything else I say, it always has a caveat, right? We do want to prepare our kids for the tests. So we have to look at the difference between test prep and grading. If we are preparing our kids for the test and they only have X amount of time according to College Board to do that test, you give them X amount of time to see what they can do. And then either you grade them only on what they got done, or you then provide their extended time to say, hey, this wouldn't necessarily count for College Board, but it's going to count for my class, and you have your time here to do what it is that you need to do. College Board made my life a whole lot easier in, I believe it was 2018 or 19, when they decided to actually start accepting IEPs as documentation. Prior to that, we had to give them psych reports, and we had to do a lot of tap dancing around when their reevals were, and it was a thing. And we found a lot of workarounds and may have gotten in trouble for some of them, but whatever. they were also very anti-emotional disability. There's no other good way to say it. Kids who had anxiety and needed extended time because of the anxiety, College Board was like, nope. And so, and of course, we can't put things on an IEP just because College Board wants them there. So it was a really fine line for twice exceptional kids. I think it was around the time that a lot of school systems started making SATs mandatory for graduation that the College Board went, whoop, the school system says this is mandatory. The kids are entitled to their accommodations. And if we don't do something about this, we are going to get sued. So rather than get sued, College Board was for once proactive and said, you know what? Submit your IEP, submit the 504 plan. And for the most part, they accept the accommodations as they are written. There's some pushback here and there, but it's not nearly as tough as it used to be. IB is our challenge right now. So one of the reasons I've been having these meetings lately is because IB is trying. IB is also an international organization. And so as our IB specialist has said, it's not just about Maryland law. It's not just about US law and IDEA, it's international. And they have to make rules that make sense for everybody because everybody's being held to the same international standard. So what their current thing is, it has to be a psych report within 2 years. Take a breath, psychologist. I'm not making you do brand new psych reports for everybody, I promise. So what we have been meeting on for the last couple of months is coming up with a way for our reeval teams to write a reevaluation and to do, I won't go through all of it because we haven't put everything out. It hasn't gone through the powers that be yet, but essentially describing the process we go through for a reevaluation and our process of doing file reviews and everything else, and then having the school psychologist sign it, because they're really big on the psychologist signature, in a way that doesn't require us to do updated cognitive testing. Because we know our process uses more than just test scores. We use actual data. We use our live kids and what they have in front of them, and we use anecdotal and we use performance, and that's all a lot more meaningful sometimes than a test score. And so we'll see. One of the great things is because we're such a big system, we have the ear of IB, at least IB in America. The person who's kind of leading this part of disability and IB is in very frequent contact with our IB coordinator in Montgomery County, as well as PG County, Fairfax County. You'll hear frequently, we have like a little triumvirate or quadrumvirate, I don't know how many you get to when you have 4 or 5 of us, that they come and have conversations with us as kind of a super region. And we each have a lot of impact on each other and what's happening with our kids. So we are going to be, I think, presenting what we are offering to IB to hopefully have them say, yes, this is okay, in a way that makes it equitable. Because one of the pushbacks was, well, then they should go and get private testing. No, we're not telling people they have to get private testing done in order to get accommodations on the IB exam. That is not equitable, it's not fair. But we also don't want to have our psychologists do 100, COGS every year so that kids can get IB testing. It doesn't work that way either. But IB is doing a better job about talking about how to incorporate working with special education students in the classroom and ways to make accommodations in their classrooms. And then they're also working on the testing side. AP is actually a little bit ahead of the curve on that. And that is a lot of where our work is now. So I have 2 good questions, and I am trying to make it full of time. Given how broad each category can be, how many gifted students are truly only gifted and not twice exceptional? So I do understand what you're asking. No, kids can be twice exceptional and not have an IEP or a 504. Where the definite, and this is also where you run into the difference between MCPS Sarah and intellectual Sarah. when I talk about twice exceptional and understanding twice exceptional, I mean twice exceptional. I mean a kid who might be gifted and have anxiety, but they don't have an IEP or a 504. They're still twice exceptional because they are managing both ends of the spectrum. They are managing both a disability and a high intellectual superiority piece. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they need a 504 or an IEP. According to our current MCPS definition, a twice exceptional student is a student who's identified as gifted and also has a 504 or an IEP. This is one of the and that was very true in 2015. That was pretty progressive in 2015. That's why I said even in the last 5 years, we have had a lot of new knowledge around neurodiversity, twice exceptionality, giftedness. This is one reason we really need to get our handbook updated, because that is exactly what it says right now in the handbook is twice exceptional is a kid with a 504 or an IEP. The problem is, one, we could have twice exceptional kids who don't have 504s or IEPs, and two, if a child has a 504 because they have diabetes and they need special accommodations around their diabetes to be able to use their phone during there to monitor blood sugar, does that make them twice exceptional? I'm pretty sure no. In fact, this has actually come up in circles where we're like, no, because twice exceptional is more to do with cognitive and you know, what's impacting the cognitive. Yes, I understand how physically diabetes can impact cognitive ability, but it's not the same thing. If a student has epilepsy, or even in the example she gave us, if a student is blind and also gifted, they need specialized instruction, but they're not necessarily twice exceptional because it's not impacting their ability to think giftedly. It's just impacting their ability to see. So it becomes a little bit sticky, but that's why we need to change the MCPS definition. And that's also why we need to, that's why I teach it in such a broad perspective, because there are a lot of twice exceptional kids out there who are twice exceptional and don't need specialized instruction or accommodations. There's also a lot out there who maybe just aren't recognized. And you're like, I get it all the time. I go in and they're like, oh yeah, that's one of your kids. Like, yeah, that's one of my kids. So I don't think they necessarily need accommodations all the time, but maybe they need accommodations in one class for one semester. If they're having a major depressive disorder or episode right now, but it's not pervasive across their life, they need something right now, but they don't need it forever. That if that fluctuation happens in their brain, then they do fall in that twice exceptional category. So that is where a twice exceptional flag could be helpful, but it also could be more confusing, because then you get the question of, well, they don't have a 504 and they don't have an IEP. Why are they twice exceptional? I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole yet. So that's where MCPS Sarah kind of takes over, and intellectual Sarah has to take a back seat to what I like having these like thought puzzles, right? That things that we kind of talk about, and we're like, this is a great thought game, but I don't want to really introduce that into policy, because that just, I think it becomes too slippery of a slope in that case. So another great question, there's a mindfulness curriculum in MCPS. Is there social emotional curriculum? We're not going to talk about the official social emotional curriculum. The, what was that? The 7 habits, or the Leader in Me. That's what it was. You would think I would know. I was on the stupid committee that picked it. Don't ask. It happens. No, there's not an official social emotional curriculum in this sense. There are social emotional curriculum, however. So depending on the program, we have some programs that use peers, which is a social emotional social skills curriculum. We have some that use the Unstuck and On Target, which is more of an executive functioning social emotional curriculum. I have a couple of social emotional curriculum that I use, and normally I would whip them out and show them to you, but I gave them to somebody today because we are developing a pacing guide for 4th and 5th grade, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, because that's where my elementary program is. But it's a curriculum pacing guide that anybody could pick up and infuse pieces of as they need to, and it aligns with our ELC curriculum. It incorporates advanced reading comprehension. It incorporates executive functioning skills, social emotional skills, and we are using a combination of social emotional curriculum, grade 3, 4, 5. There's 3 separate books, a curriculum called I'm Not Just Gifted, and then also the Jacob's Ladder effective curriculum, and then Sometimes we use learning to be a durable person, although I usually use that more for kindergarten, second grade. And we'll definitely get more into curriculum and social emotional curriculum next week next class, because that is our big social emotional focus. So we are at 9:02, which is slightly a bit over. Normally the way I run class is I turn off the recording and I answer questions for folks. Honestly, my voice is killing me, and so I am going to limit us to 9:10 tonight. If you have questions, you want to stay on with me, but for the purpose of recording, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.